Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you today?
Good. Nice to see you. You have a show. How many pieces do you have here?
There's approximately 30 pieces.
And
They're all book-based works, so I'm an artist that's always worked with found material, things that interest me that I find on the street or that are just lying around. I need a trigger to start me thinking, and I like to combine things together and see how they bounce off each other. So lately I've been using old books. I've previously used old doors, old windows, found sheet metal, corrugated, rusted metal, things like that, loudspeakers, vinyl records. So currently for the last 7 years I've been working on a book series, and there's an example right here. It's untitled. Most of the works are untitled. As you can see, it's based on a grid. A lot of my works are grid-based, but I like to introduce elements of painterliness or chaos to fight against that. Kind of like a tension between musical solo and the original melody of the song. There's kind of a tension there. I prefer strong contrast. I tend to work with somber colors. This one's a little brighter. The way I hit upon using books was, as I said, I've always used what's at hand, found materials, and I just had a box of old books that I started using one day and laying on a canvas, and that one is in the show as well. Perhaps we can see it in a moment. I just found that they naturally work together well with my inclination to use overlapping layers, grid formations, and so on.
and they are good books too. Classics.
Yeah, I tend to choose books for more formal reasons. So, for example, we'll see in a moment, there's one in the boardroom, one half is all white, one half is all black. So in that instance, I chose books that were either white or black, right? I like when there's the classic novels. I like the typography. I like the more vintage look of the artwork. Sometimes there's faces, which draws you in, sort of speaks to the viewer. And sometimes purely it's for the color of the book or the actual size of the book, if it fits within the composition.
And here?
This one again is from the same series as the one we just saw. It's a little earlier. So this one has more canvas in it. I like to work with small ready-made artist canvases, but then I like to paint on them, abuse them, recombine them in different ways. You can see that I've integrated books, canvas, and there's a piece of sheet metal. I mentioned I like to use found metal. I've kind of integrated a grid onto it. I tried to find an overall grid structure or rhythm to the piece, and you can see I've used some stenciling or stamping as well. The compositions tend to work out as I go. Sometimes it flows easily, sometimes it's more difficult. I could start with a predetermined concept, but it doesn't always go where you want it to go. Sometimes you have to follow it along. Sometimes it's a struggle, sometimes it flows very easily.
So, how long have you been working this style, recycling?
Over 25 years. I started out trying to paint on canvas, but soon found myself attaching things, as other artists have in the past. And so I switched to painting more on a wooden board, a plywood panel, as opposed to a canvas, because you can screw things onto it, it's more rigid, it fights with you,
Durable.
it's stronger, you can attach things to it. And in some cases I've cut them up, reformatted them, so it just works better for me than a canvas.
What about the one over there on the wall?
The one in the back is about 3 years old. It's called Little Scarlet. As I say, they're usually untitled, but sometimes a title will call it for me. In this particular case, you can see there's a book buried within, which is Little Scarlet by Walter Mosley, popular writer. And because I ended up using a lot of reddish tones in the painting, it just seemed natural to work with that. So you can see that in some of the earlier ones, the books are more buried, whereas in some of the newer ones, the books are more to the fore. And that's just something that's evolved. It could go the other way tomorrow. One never knows. One just follows the work.
And I see different shapes over there in the borders.
Yes, I've also been drawn to circles from time to time. This series is about 3 years in the making. It's not the only ones I have.
Can we go close?
Yeah. And I've always worked on and off with loudspeakers. So I started that over 20 years ago. I put a loudspeaker into a sculpture. I was thinking about making a tape loop to play a particular piece of music. And the technology was not that easy to work with back then. And in the meantime of me deciding what to do with the recording, I decided I liked the fact that there was no sound. It lends an air of expectancy, or sometimes it's playing with the idea of the work speaks to you, but is not speaking to you. It's that whole frustration thing. As you can see, this one is a little more wild and chaotic. They vary kind of like on a pendulum from more orderly to more crazy.
So
This
are
one
these
here is
three
the
a
most-
series?
This
Are
one
they
here is the
series?
most recent. Well, they're a series in the sense that I return to the shape and reuse it. And there's some of them that are more like an oval. This is my newest one. I've started to play with vinyl records, and I had the idea of doing just a very modest black and white composition. Just two halves, contrast. I always like contrast. So that's what this one's all about. I've got some black hardcover books up here, flowing into some black paperback books. As you can see, I use a lot of hardware to attach the books. That was just a necessary evil, because how do you attach a book to a canvas without the pages all flapping apart? So that just occurred to me one day. And I now that's become part of the composition. I'll make them quieter by using smaller screws. Or sometimes I'll want to make it more aggressive by using larger screws and grommets and things. So I've been playing with some smaller ones that have vinyl records, but not ready to show just yet. Perhaps the next show.
So do you have many records like this?
I have a few that I'm playing with at home. It may be the next series, or maybe that I combine them with books. I'm not sure at this point. Here's another in the series. It's a little bit smaller. Obviously, in this one, there's little things that I played with, like the echo of the hand here to the hand over here. Sometimes one does that with the composition. The pieces of wood are just another way to hold the book down. Pieces of scrap metal.
And this combination of metal and wood is so interesting.
I've always been drawn to vintage things. I prefer, I think most people are the same way. They prefer the broken-in leather boots to the brand-new leather boots or leather jacket. Jeans that are broken in. Things that have a history built into the surface, from weathering and wear and tear. That's very interesting to me. I'm very interested in that. Erosion, abrasion. I never did it, but I once toyed with the idea of paintings that were dragged down the street to abrade them. But that just gives you an idea of ideas one can pursue from time to time.
And we have rectangular shapes over there.
This one here is about a year old. So from doing the circular ones, I decided one day to toy with just having rounded corners. And I like to contrast side to side or diagonally. So this one has diagonally opposite wood to wood and books to books. Again, there's a speaker. Perhaps coincidentally, I don't know. Subliminally, I had just gotten a smartphone at the time, and to me it looks like a smartphone with apps on it due to the shape, and I think it's a coincidence.
So you're actually a pioneer.
I've got another one here that's, this one was based on I wanted to do another one with the same rounded corners. It's got a bit more of the wood, and it's a wax-based paint, which is called encaustic. But I just hit upon, in a secondhand store, this series of Hardy Boy books, and I just liked the color of the blue. I read them as a child, but I was just drawn to the blue, and I wanted to contrast it with a reddish brown, and I think it goes together.
Well, you're a very well-read man.
Yes, the Hardy Boys, top shelf. This one's called Killing Time. Again, sometimes the book actually suggests the title Killing Time is a book by Thomas Berger. This is, again, books I had lying around. This one is more of a composition in blacks and browns, I would say. I do have other series that have notebooks that are just rectangular forms, and I kind of swing back and forth between the bookworks and more just rectilinear abstractions, as well as other works. But the books have been the big focus for a few years now.
And how do you choose your wood?
Much as an artist buys paint and has various colors on the table and just decides to put various colors on the palette, I will pick up scraps of wood that I see. Sometimes there's remnants of this might have been from a larger sheet of plywood that I cut for another work. Sometimes it'll just be whatever's lying around. So just as artist A will choose, okay, I've got a tube of red and a tube of blue, I might pick up this piece of wood and this piece of metal that's lying in my corner. I try to stockpile these things so that I have material to work with.
And there's more.
There's more. The exhibition continues. Before we go on, this particular piece, it's, as you can see, it's shaped like a word balloon. And in this one, I've buried the books within the piece. You can look on the side. I like the idea that it's a word balloon that suggests speech, but there's an element of suppression. So, not that I'm political, but I just like to toy with those ideas. So, again, the words that aren't talking. So, there's a couple of these at home as well. It's a potential series that. This one's fairly new.
It's bigger.
I just had this piece of rusted metal from an older work. I do sometimes cannibalize my older works. It's all raw fodder. And I just kind of visualized it being in the center of a larger piece, and I just went from there. And from there, various decisions are made. Right side, wood and paint, left side, books. Again, one sometimes toys with the nature of the books. I've got the French connection here with a history of France with a French writer. One sometimes toys with those things while working, but overall it's the composition and the layering that's important to me.
Yes.
There's a similar one here. Again, found wood, thrift shop purchases, such as this and this. I've been working for many years with cedar shingles. Strikes me as a humorous thing to work with as a Canadian artist. And sometimes I will paint on them in caustic and then melt it off, leading to these various runny and drippy areas. Again, most of the books are covered in caustic, which is then melted off. I like the residual effect. If there's an open page, the paint stains right into the paper. This one's called Don't Look Now, based on a 1973 film that had a motif of a red image going through the movie, and I just happened to have that piece of wood with the red paint on it, and I was using it in the work, and I just happened to watch that film that night, and the title just suggested itself.
This one looks a little different.
A little different. I had an older series, I think I mentioned using old doors. I had an old series using doors and the wooden shingles that I've talked about. They were sort of based on kind of the walls you see in old laneways, the walls of old garages, erosion, weathering, all those things. And I just happened to find this on the side of the road. I had this piece from an old musical instrument that someone gave me. Again, one just likes to combine things together and see how they work out. So I just visualized this coming out of a work, and then you go from there. What have I got to work with? A bit like cooking with leftovers. What am I making today? Sometimes it works, sometimes you fall flat on your fanny.
Nice.
What have we got here? We've got an older piece here. This is about 6 years old, 5 years old. Again, there's an encyclopedia series that I purchased. Some are covered with wax paint, some are covered with rusted metal, some are covered with wood. Just various things I had lying around. Sometimes the side of the work is even important to me, almost sculptural. So there's the side there and the other side. Not always, but sometimes.
It's interesting, we never really look here on the side.
I do. I look for paint stains and drips. There's a sculptor I like, Richard Deacon, and he has wood glue dripping out of the seams of his work, and I like that. I think most people like painterliness and painterly effects in their work. This one's more recent. So here's an example. I had this from an old hot plate. So I use a hot plate to cautiously melt my wax. And I had an old one. I had an old element from one. And this is an example. I had this for 5 or 10 years before I used it. It's just good to keep materials on hand in case you need them. You never know when you're going to run dry of materials. So I'm not a hoarder, but I like to collect things that I might use.
So where do you keep this? You store this in your garage? How do you store all this?
I have my garage. I've converted to a studio. And so my old studio, which is my basement, I've converted to shelving, and I store works, keep them there ready to go for exhibitions. But I paint in my garage now.
And do you do open studios?
I haven't at this time. Interested in that in the future, perhaps. These are just other examples of using the book, and this one's a little more rustic. There's a piece of an old door. I mentioned using old doors. Piece of an old door there. That one's a little bit older. Some of them are quite more rustic compared to the new ones. This just derived from, I just happened to have this and this, and I just pictured them going together because of the curve, and we just went from there.
Nice. And also very bright colors in these ones.
Yes. So there's one here, I don't know if you can see it. Again, I've got the shingles. So these I actually cut to a certain shape, and they actually had paint on them already of this family of colors. So I just added a bit more to it. And then I had this book which was stained kind of a burgundy, and so it kind of went together. And so one goes, okay, what can I do? How big should this be? Should this be a small piece? And all those decisions. There's some in each of these cubicles here. There's a grouping of 2 right here, which I quite like. Not sure if you can get in there. Again, an older one of the very earliest ones, 2007. Again, just a piece of metal that I found, and decided to make it half of a panel. And from there, it's what you do with the other half, and you just start playing. Another example of more hardcover books. So these are hardcovers with their spine split, painted on. Again, with some weathered wood. Little bits of stamping from the same stamp.
How long would it take to complete a piece like this?
This one here took me a while, perhaps a month. A piece can come together in as little as a day or as much as a month. It just depends how it goes, the size of the piece. Perhaps the need to dry layers between layers, things like that. Sometimes a piece doesn't work out and then it becomes fodder for the next piece. You know, paint over it, take it apart, reuse the elements that are within it. There's a small piece in this room. So I had done a series just before this that was all stacking canvases, and this one integrates some books. It's called Link because don't know if one wants to explain everything, but all the books are mysteries about killings, so there's a link between all the different books that are underneath the work. Over here, perhaps we'll go in this room now. There's two here. This was the first book piece that I did. As I was saying, one day it just occurred to me to use this material. I had used encaustic in the past. I'd been using primarily oil at the time that I did this, so I got out the encaustic again. There's a story behind everything. This is a piece from a boat that was at the cottage. We decided to redo the prow of the boat because this was rotted. So I cut off part of the scavenged wood. I saved it because I liked the blue. And so there's some pairing of the blues.
And good writers too.
These were my books. As I go on, I can't read fast enough, so I'm actually purchasing books for the purpose of making art. But early on, they're all my books that I read. There's kind of a series going on too of these metal elements. I find these in thrift shops. There's a lot of serving dishes, silver platters, things like that. I like the effect. There's varying degrees of shininess or what do you call it in silver? It's tarnish.
Yes.
Tarnishing that goes on. Contrasting with this metal and so on. Okay. This one here is kind of a hybrid between earlier kind of simple grids and the book pieces. It's about a 2009 work. So it's kind of a combination of my grid paintings, which were kind of like this, and the book paintings. It does add interest to books, so I've been enjoying using the books, and there's unpredictable things that happen. One never knows what happens, what's going to happen when one stains a book, scorches the wax off, things like that. You get some accidental effects. Above this file cabinet, there's two works. They're slightly older. They're approximately 2011. And I do sometimes play with odd shapes and things. Not always. Lately they've been more rectangular, but these are examples of where the work was coming from at that time. Okay. We're doing the whole show?
Yes.
This one actually has a title. It's called Plagiarism. I was having a little poke at myself because when one does a series, there's a certain point when you think, am I just repeating myself or should I move on to the next thing? But so I was taking a little poke at myself there. And obviously plagiarism ties into various writers have been accused of plagiarism. Not that I'm saying these writers are plagiarists. I was the plagiarist. So I'm not quite done with books. They're evolving. I had a moment of doubt there, and I had some fun with the title.
And a small one over there.
The small one here, yeah. The small one is, I was given a box of samples from a decor. These were samples of surfaces you could have your kitchen cupboards. So someone was throwing out a box of these samples. So just decided to paint on them and combine them with this piece was actually left over from the big, the one that looks like a smartphone. Mm-hmm. These elements were actually left over from that. So never waste anything, always reuse everything. I really enjoy recycling things.
And these pieces, their lifespan is?
Lifespan?
Yeah, like they last a long, long time, or do they need special care?
I always suggest to treat them as prints because the ink and that on the covers of the books are not necessarily archival quality. I try to use more black and white lately because I've been concerned with that. But as long as the pieces are out of direct sunlight, they'll last a long time. This one's from 2010. It's more of just a rectilinear abstraction. Again, there are books covered up. I've got the orange and caustic here, some metal scraps that have combined. It's more of just a formal composition.
How did you get into encaustic?
I had read about it. There's an artist I like named Jasper Johns. It's an ancient material. The Greeks used it. It's basically wax with pigment. And you can do various things to make it more durable. Resins to mark can be put into it. Again, just a small composition. This one here is again made from, if you look on the side, it's made from a piece of a cut-up door.
I'd say, certainly
I used to make them about, well, actually the size of 2 doors, but now I like to work with fragments. Got a couple of colorful ones here. This one's called Second Skin, after the book here. Again, the trigger was finding this piece. I've got an old piece of a base of a pot here. My son found this on the street, gave it to me. I think I stole it from him actually, and I apologized after. My son's also an artist, and my daughter as well. And this last one is called Watchman. It's just composition in blues and blacks, I would call it. So that's the work.
And it's going to be here for a month.
Thanks for coming out. We'll be at the AOE Gallery until July 8th is the last day. The gallery's open from 9 to 4:30, Monday to Fridays. I'm very pleased to be here. It's a nice space, and I recommend come on out to the show. It's at the Shenkman Arts Center on Centrum Boulevard. It's a fantastic complex in the East End of Ottawa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.